the murder of schoolgirl Karina Zelisova, which occurred on August 28, 2015 year, shook Novosibirsk and Russia. This is the Defunct City channel. Subscribe to our channel and don't forget to click on the bell not to miss new episodes and stay informed. Karina Zelisova, a simple 16-year-old ninth grader from Novosibirsk, was the only child in her family. As Karina's relatives later recalled, she was a real angel. She had huge plans for life. She was actively engaged in sports, fond of swimming, dreamed of learning Japanese, and later to become a surgeon in Japan. A straight-A student, she had just recently passed her GIA exams with flying colors, and she was going to continue her studies at a new school in Kalininsky district of Novosibirsk. Since Karina planned to go to medical school and later become a doctor, her parents made sure to transfer her to a place where there was a special chemistry and biology class. Classes at the new school were to begin as usual in September. On the 28th of August at 3:30 in the afternoon, Karina and her parents were at the school assembly. Everything went as usual. Nothing foretold trouble. Karina then went for a walk, although she had not intended to go for a walk before. Karina promised to be back in time for a celebratory dinner to mark the start of the new school year. But, alas, she was no longer destined to return. And in the morning, someone called Karina and told her that she would go for a walk on Kalinina Square and that she would be home at 18 o'clock. Everyone in the family knew that Karina was very responsible and trusted her unconditionally, so they never supervised her. The time went on. At 17 o'clock, Karina's phone was still working, but she didn't pick it up, and at 18 o'clock in the evening the phone no longer worked. That was when her parents began to seriously worry about where she was. At 20 p.m., they started calling an ambulance. At 10:30 p.m., they started calling the police. The police arrived at the Zelisovs' home, and after looking at the passport, the girls were shocked to hear that Karina had been found dead in the Pervomaisky district a couple of hours earlier. The parents couldn't find room for themselves until morning and waited for the investigators to arrive. Then, unable to bear it themselves, drove to Pervomaika. There they were told that the girl's ex-friend, 16-year-old Mark Konkov, killed her in his cottage. Mark Konkov was born on August 28, 1929. His parents are not the last people in Novosibirsk. His father, Igor Evgenievich Konkov, a major businessman from Novosibirsk, the owner of 11 companies involved in the processing of metals and construction, the general director of Textile, which is the main company. As of 2015 year, the plant's revenue was more than 600 million rubles a year. Mark's mother, Natalia Konkova, is a practicing psychologist and personal growth coach. The media also reported on Marco's uncle Alexander Konkov. He is an expert political scientist, head of the Department of the Analytical Center under the government of the Russian Federation. He taught at Moscow State University and a financial university under the Russian government. There were 5 children in the Konkov family. Mark studied at Novosibirsk High School number 162. His teachers gave him contradictory characteristics. There is information that Konkov repeatedly insulted and beat his classmates. However, employees of the educational institution did not pass information about this to law enforcement agencies. The acquaintance of Mark and Karina happened 2 years before the tragic events at a birthday party. Karina came to congratulate her friend. A friend of the birthday girl brought Konkov there. They developed their acquaintance in social networks. Karina and Mark corresponded for a long time before they met again, because they studied at different schools. Moreover, they lived in different ends of the city. On their first date, he invited her to a movie. She immediately told her parents about it. Naturally, they could not let their daughter go with an unfamiliar guy, so they took Karina to the meeting themselves. It was important for them to know who the girl liked and what her new friend looked like. Mark made a great impression on Karina's parents. He seemed to them to be extremely sociable, far from being withdrawn. He was not even 15 years old at the time. But Karina's father was struck by the fact that at such a young age he could talk to adults on the same level, could support a conversation on any topic. Then he noted to himself that the clever boy would go far, develop beyond his years. She looked like a child compared to Mark. He could hold a conversation on various topics, but sometimes he was too clever. He called out concepts that the average ninth grader should hardly know. Karina thought he was smarter than many of her friends. A sympathy arose between them. They often called each other, met with a seemingly unassuming boy seemed to her ideal. She liked his height and hands. She was interested in him. As Mark's sister Karina later wrote, she had seen him 3 times in her life. They had been friends for a long time. She wondered then how Mark had gotten such a pretty girl. Yes, he was witty, resourceful, and interesting. But still, her sister didn't think he would get such a girl. She was happy for him, for them, that they had found each other. During their relationship, Mark visited the Zalesovs twice, but she was mostly the one who went to see him. She explained that she was cramped and the boy's family lived in a big house. There is a lot of space, and it is more convenient to meet there. The students were friends, but often quarreled. They were completely different in character. She was in love with Mark, but it was difficult to find a common language with him. Karina forgave Mark for his rudeness online, but she hardly took it seriously either. But there was a moment that bothered her. Mark was addicted to sleep deprivation. He didn't sleep and enjoyed it. As she wrote to one of her friends at the time, he now enjoyed his state of effect. He said he feels almost happy. I'm very worried about him. At some point, Karina's parents began to notice that the teenager's relationship had become strange. Their daughter came home upset, crying all the time and worrying a lot. According to Karina's godmother, Marina Grivinkina, Kamkov always had aggression toward the girl. Later it would become known that Mark raised his hand against her several times. In the end, unable to watch the suffering of her daughter, at some point her parents told her not to communicate with him if you can stand it so much. She agreed with them, somehow uncertainly, and later she convinced them that she had broken off the relationship with him, and they were no longer in touch. Life went on, time went on. Karina hadn't been close to Mark for about 6 months, but he was constantly stalking her. He constantly threatened, "If you don't do this and that, I'll kill myself." She worried about his state of mind. It was later determined that on the morning of August 28, Mark, then 16 years old, called the girl and once again threatened her with suicide and forced her to come to the cottage in the Pervomesky district of Novosibirsk, which belonged to his family. Karina once again felt sorry for the guy and decided to come. Some of the details of that fateful day became known from a letter later published on the internet about Mark's alleged sister. Let's start with Mark's birthday. We decided for ourselves that we weren't going to congratulate him. He's been acting like a dog for the last 2 years. Mark has always been too mature. He was spoiled as a child. He was the littlest, sweetest, most beloved. He was carried in his arms, taken with him to adult companies, and counted on his opinions. Until 2 years ago, we had a wonderful large family. Then Mark went to a new school, sort of a decent one. We rejoiced. Finally, he'd make friends with the normal kids, get better grades. No way. Every day, Mark got weirder and weirder. He and his friends were messing around with caffeine pills and sleep deprivation and all that other crap. All day long, he either sat at his computer, slept, or went for a walk. Educational measures were taken. Both the deprivation of the computer and the lack of pocket money, he didn't care. He just slept then and was sick. Didn't go to school. Emotions as such were not seen from him, neither joy nor anger. I can see now that he should have been admitted to a psychiatrist, sent to sports. But the policy of nonviolence in the family was always there. Yes, we decided not to celebrate his birthday and not to give him anything. Let him sit in his room and play. And then, on August 27th, Mark called, inviting me to his birthday party. He called all my relatives and invited them home by 18 o'clock. It's worth noting that by that time, we had all grown up and lived separately. Only Mom, Dad, Mark, and the youngest brother with cerebral palsy stayed in the house. Perhaps we all lacked parental love, since after the little one was born, Mom and Dad put all their energy into curing him, but nothing worked. Anyway, even Mark's mom solemnly called him, even though he had been in a terrible fight with her for 3 months. At first I suggested going to a cafe and celebrating there, but no. Mark insisted on celebrating at home. He wrote, "Why go somewhere when you are comfortable at home?" We decided to celebrate at our house instead of Mark's, and he reluctantly agreed. We set the party for 18 hours. Dad called and said he would be a little late at work, but that he and Mark would be at our place by 7:30 p.m. He had to pick up his son from home. At 17:30 I called Mark. His cell phone was off. I called the home phone. He picked up, and I asked him what kind of pizza to order. He replied that we should get our own taste. The voice was calm. Dad called at the beginning of 7 o'clock, said he was picking up Mark now, and they were taking a bullet to our place. An hour later, I got a text from my mom. "Karina is at our house with her throat cut. We're waiting for the police." By the time Karina arrived at the house, in addition to Mark, there was also a nanny who was taking care of the Konkov's youngest child who had cerebral palsy. As it will turn out later during the investigative experiment, this woman could not hear anything that was happening on the second floor of the cottage. That evening, according to the investigation, once on the second floor of the cottage, Karina was attacked by the Konkovs after a while. The teenager stabbed the girl at least 12 times in the neck and about 13 times in the face and hands. Mark also struck Karina at least 4 times with his fist and a statue. Karina fought back against a former friend who had suddenly turned into a cold-blooded killer. She tried to break free, praying for mercy, but he cold-bloodedly cut the girl with a knife and beat her. She did not manage to save her life. She died of massive blood loss. Later in the court session, Konkov explained that he allegedly had not planned the murder of Karina in advance, and everything happened spontaneously. According to him, he initially stabbed her in the neck area and was sure that she would die immediately after the first blow. However, after the stabbing was done and he saw that Karina was not dead, in order to finish the murder, Mark stabbed her several times with his right and left fists in the face area. In order to render Karina unconscious, and then in order to bring her to her death as quickly as possible so that she would not suffer, he stabbed her 10 times in the neck area. Just listen to how cynical it is to finish off a defenseless girl with 10 strokes of the knife so that she does not suffer. Then, when it was over, he washed the floor, changed into clean clothes, and drank tea. The girl's father, Sergei Zelosov, later claimed that about 18 hours and 12 minutes Konkov called his friend from the phone of the dead girl, noting that the teenager had to bring the device to the palm of the already dead girl because it had a fingerprint-based locking system. Later, Karina's father's words were confirmed. The same friend of Mark's said that night Konkov called him and began to describe in detail what had happened, relishing the pleasure with which he had mocked her, how she begged on her knees not to kill her, that she would not tell anyone, how long she had been dying, bleeding to death. At the end, he added that it felt good to kill, that he enjoyed killing. These were not just the words of a sick man, they were the words of a real maniac. According to the young man, Mark sometimes talked about suicide, but he wrote it off as a peculiar humor of his comrade. One day, Mark texted him that he wanted to kill someone. In response, the teenager jokingly made a list of people worthy of death. Whether Karina was on that list is unknown. Komkov's friend stressed that he took it only as a joke and never thought Mark would be capable of such a thing. The friend of the schoolboy also believes that Mark was planning to commit suicide that day and killed Karina just so he would have no way back, so he would not back down from what he had planned. The young man also said that he had seen Konkov on his birthday about a couple of hours before Karina's murder. He was, as usual, cheerful and upbeat. The young man had no reason to think that he might commit any crime. Nor was he alerted by the fact that some time before the tragedy Konkov had given him his computer and phone. One of Mark's acquaintances recalls that the teenager had been hatching a murder plan in his head for a long time. He had little contact with his loved ones. There were no friendly relations in the family. He often said that he didn't like life, and all summer of 2015, he kept saying that he would kill himself on his birthday. On August 28th, they corresponded on social networks. The girl tried to talk him out of committing suicide, but he replied that he could not change his mind. He also wrote that before he died, he wanted to torture Karina and nail her to the wall. Unfortunately, the girl did not believe it. She thought it was a joke. After Karina's murder, screenshots of her correspondence with Mark on the social network VKontakte appeared on the internet. The girl sent him smiley faces with hearts, and he said in response, "I'd cut your throat." According to Mark's parents, what happened was an attempted double suicide. After Zelasova's death, the teenager allegedly tried to hang himself. Komkov's father said that thanks to the fact that I gave him artificial respiration, my son is alive. And he says, "Why did you save me? I don't want to live." Karina was involved in this in one way or another, Igor told me. "Daddy, why did you save me? Do you love me? You love me very much. Give me the shotgun. I have to shoot myself. My friend is dead, and I have to be with her." According to the father, that's what he heard from his son when he pumped him out. The ambulance and police were not called immediately. According to the relatives of the deceased, who tried to reconstruct the picture of terrible events together with the law enforcement officers, the lawyers were the first to arrive at the cottage. Long hours passed before the law enforcement officers learned about the murder. Experts state that Karina died at 17 o'clock. Mark's father came home at 18 o'clock. But the call to the police came at 9 o'clock in the evening. Konkov approached the law enforcers through intermediaries. He called his friends and asked them to tell the police, because I can't. Mark spent the next night behind bars. Karina Zelasova was buried on August 31st, the day before the start of the school year. Mark Konkov was immediately detained at the scene, and after questioning he was charged with murder. The next day, on August 29th, 2015, the teenager was taken to the Novosibirsk-Pervomesky District Court for the election of preventive measures. Perhaps this story would have remained unnoticed by the general public. Murders are committed daily all over the country. However, what happened was the following. The investigating authorities applied for the arrest of the suspect. However, Judge Elena Lakina, who was deciding on the measure of restraint, found no grounds for such a decision and ruled that Konkov be placed under house arrest. This instantly caused a flurry of indignation in the city and allowed those who were certain of his guilt to believe that justice was on the side of the young man's affluent parents. And thanks to his father's connections and money, he could get away with it. The court's decision sparked a storm of protest. Already on the 3rd of September, a petition with a demand to arrest Mark Konkov appeared on internet resources. In less than a week after the court decision to keep Mark Konkov under house arrest, more than 70,000 people signed a petition for his arrest. The news about the cold-blooded murder of the 9th grader instantly spread all over the social networks. An application to hold a rally of 2,000 people protesting against the court decision was submitted to the Novosibirsk City Hall. The rally was allowed, but not on the central square, as the organizers wanted, but on another less popular site in the city. However, it never took place. On September 9 of the 15th year, the appeals board of the Novosibirsk Regional Court considered the complaint and decided to change the preventive measure for Konkov to detention for 2 months, after which the teenager was arrested right in the courtroom. Subsequently, the suspect's detention was repeatedly extended. Konkov was assigned a comprehensive inpatient psychiatric examination. The examination was conducted in Novosibirsk and lasted several weeks, but yielded no results. The teenager was referred to the Sturbsky State Research Center for Social and Forensic Psychiatry to undergo a second examination. However, it did not give a final conclusion of Marko's mental condition either. In January of the year 2016, it was decided to conduct a third more in-depth examination at the Institute with the involvement of additional specialists, including a sexologist. At the end of March of the 16th year, it became known that as a result of the expertise, Konkov was declared of limited sanity. The experts concluded that the young man suffers from schizotypal disorder and has a probable tendency to sadism. On April 23rd, the suspect was transferred to Novosibirsk SIZO No. 1. In April of the 16th year, the investigation toughened the charges against Konkov. Whereas previously the teenager had been charged with simple murder, he was now charged with murder committed with particular cruelty. On May 13th of the 16th, it was announced that Department for Investigation of Especially Important Cases of Investigatory Directorate of Investigatory Committee of Russian Federation for Novosibirsk region had finished preliminary investigation of the case. And on June 1st, the Deputy Public Prosecutor of Novosibirsk region, Sergei Medvedev, approved the indictment on the case. Soon it was transferred for consideration on merits in Pervomesky District Court of Novosibirsk. And on June 16 in Pervomesky District Court took place the first preliminary hearing on the murder of Karina Zelesova. According to Karina's mother, during the break, the defendant's lawyer and the defendant were talking and laughing. On June 27, 16, the trial on the merits began. The session started at 11 o'clock local time and lasted more than 3 hours. The mother of the murdered girl was interrogated, which was interrupted by Konkov's father. He was pounding his fists on the table, saying, "When is she going to shut up already with her hatred?" The defendant himself during the hearing only partially admitted his guilt. Konkov's defense line was that he had committed the murder without any signs of violence, that he had not planned the murder of Karina in advance. Everything happened spontaneously. Mark's father continued to insist on the version that what happened was an attempted double suicide. On October 17, Konkov was interrogated at the session during which the defendant again partially admitted his guilt and denied the version of double suicide, finally telling the truth that he wanted to kill and killed. On October 18, there was a court hearing during which the state prosecution asked the defendant for 9.5 years in prison. Karina's parents asked the judge to sentence Mark Konkov to 10 years in prison. They intended to recover from his parents moral damages in the amount of 20 million rubles and the costs of the funeral. However, at the court hearing on August 2, Igor Konkov said that he did not intend to compensate the parents of Karina for moral damage. On October 31st of October 2016, the court finally sentenced Mark Konkov. Konkov, convicted of murder, hid his face during the reading of the verdict and did not even get up to hear it. Judge Gennady Gromov sentenced the teenager to 9 years without restriction of freedom in an educational colony with compulsory treatment by a psychiatrist. The court also ordered to exact from Konkov's parents 1 million rubles in moral damages for each of Karina's parents. Karina's mother would later say, "The verdict is lawful, but unfair. You can't get the child back." The final sentence entered into force on February 13, 2017. Konkov will be in an educational colony until his majority, and then will be transferred to a general regime penal colony. In addition, the young man is assigned observation and treatment by a psychiatrist. When Konkov turned 18 on August 28th of the 17th year, he was transferred from the educational colony to Correctional Colony 3. During his time in Correctional Colony 3, convict Konkov did not show any desire to find a job. He did not submit a written or verbal application to the administration of the institution. He was not considered at the Employment Commission. Later, on December 20, the killer of 16-year-old Karina Zalesova tried to commit suicide in front of other inmates. He chose a very exotic method. The guy managed to build a weapon from improvised means and shot himself in the chest. But he didn't die. He only lost a finger. The prosecutor's inspection did not find anything illegal in the colony. Kamkov tried to kill himself with quite legal instruments. Kamkov was transferred to the intensive care unit of the Ordinary City Hospital. This is not to say that Kamkov got any preferential treatment for himself by his prank. On the contrary, later, the Maine Department of Federal Penitentiary Service also filed a lawsuit with the court, asking Kamkov to reimburse the money spent on his treatment. At the moment, Kamkov continues to serve his sentence in Prison Colony 3. He is now 23 years old and will be released very soon. And in the room of his brutally murdered Karina Zalesova, there is still a new bag on the table. She ordered it on the internet. The purchase came after the girl's death. Clean notebooks, pens, which she had purchased before her studies. In the closet, hanging never-worn blouses, skirts. All this will never come in handy for her. Karina Zalesova will always be 16 years old. Take care of yourself and your family.